I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Hey there, spooky nerds. Welcome to Talking Strange, Paranormal Pop Culture Show. I'm Aaron, and I am very excited about the guest today. I'm a big Batman and comic book fan, as you guys must know. In fact, I'm wearing my Batman Ouija board shirt for those watching on the YouTubes. And obviously a fan of horror, a fan of Universal Monsters. And the gentleman I'm talking to today is really, I would say, a guy that's a busy guy, and also just such an incredible creator that he's quickly on his way to legend status, I would say, in the comic book world. Rodney Barnes, he's an award-winning writer, producer, comic book creator. He's got a vibrant, emphatic voice that's really established him as a Hollywood mainstay. And most recently, he was executive producer and writer for HBO's Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty, which was chronicling the professional personal lives of the 1980s Showtime Lakers. And his publishing imprint, Zombie Love Studios, is dedicated to storytelling through BIPOC perspective, which includes Killadelphia, his book that was nominated for an Eisner Award, and Blacula, Return of the King, which is the adaptation of the cult horror classic. And he's also right now he hosted the Winning Time podcast, and then that led to him being the co-creator and host of the Run Fool podcast, which is listed as a true crime fiction podcast. It's a scripted show, very nicely produced, and it's a monster story. It's telling stories about creatures as well as grief, and it gets 800,000 downloads a month, and is ranked 38th in the true crime fiction podcast category. He's also, along with so many other books, including the Ahsoka Season 1 adaptation comic book series, he is the writer of Batman Full Moon, which is available now in hardcover, and it tells a story about Batman v. werewolves, and specifically what happens when Batman himself contracts the werewolf curse. It is a fun book. It is a horror book. It looks gorgeous. Steven Subic is the artist of it, and it is, yeah, we've got limbs being ripped off. We've got lots of blood and lots of Batman action. Just a gorgeous and fun horror book. We also have some characters showing up that we recognize, such as Zatanna and John Constantine. So that's out now. Anyhow, let's get to it. We talked to Rodney Barnes about Batman Full Moon and his love of horror and his own spooky stories. All right, Rodney, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I'm super excited to talk to you because not only have you done so much, but you're a monster kid.
I am.
You're such a monster kid. I read in an interview that you were a Kolchak fan, and
Still am.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love that character. I arrived to it a little bit later, but it was once I locked onto it, Kolchak was, I'm like, this is my guy, kind of goofy, but also pursuing the monsters. And I guess, I don't know, maybe in some way between Clark Kent, Peter Parker, Carl Kolchak influenced the desire to be a journalist and then pursue the monsters. So what was sort of your hook for Kolchak? Like, when did you first discover the show, the movies, and then the enduring love?
There was this weird period of time when I was a kid. I mean, really, really young, where ABC, CBS, they had these movies of the week. They had a lot of really quality stuff. There was Gargoyles, the one with Bernie Casey, Resurrection of Peter Proud, and then Kolchak the Night Stalker. And so for a kid who didn't have a lot of money and was really young and couldn't get to the movies, this was like the next best thing. And it wasn't like now where you can just push a button and you can get anything you want at any moment. Like you really had to wait. You had to read the TV guide, you had to see what was coming, and then you had to be there on time. There was no rewinding of anything. And if you didn't catch it, you don't know when it's going to come back ever again, if ever. And so Kolchak was like teed up by a lot of those things. Salem's Lot also, the miniseries, Stephen King's Salem's Lot. And I just fell in love with all of this stuff. And it just, between Monsters Magazine, the Aurora monster models I used to put together as a kid, the late night creature feature stuff, the stuff we just talked about with the TV movies, comic books, a lot of horror comics, illustrated by the late great Bernie Wrightson and Mike Plug and a lot of those guys, Werewolf by Night and Frankenstein and all that stuff. It was like it was just there. It was always around me, and I just consumed so much of it. It was a really great time.
First off, Resurrection of Peter Proud. That is a deep cut, my friend.
Oh yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody reference that one before,
Oh
but
yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
Oh yeah. There was a sequel to it too.
Yeah.
They did a couple of them. Yeah.
I actually didn't realize it was a TV movie at first.
Mhm.
So that's a wow. That one throws me off a little bit. Yeah, the what is it about the character of Kolchak in particular, though, that because this is not a guy that's charging in, always with, he's not a hero, right?
No. He has heroic qualities. I think the through line to him is he's going to find out the truth to what a thing is when the media wants to make it another thing. He's like, no, it was a vampire, and I'm going to prove it to you. So there is a quality to him that is honorable. Is he the guy that's going to go in and he did kill a couple of monsters, but is he going to be the guy that's trying to save the world or let the world know what's really happening?
Yeah.
I think there's virtue in a character like that.
Yeah, I recall this moment as like a younger nerd where things started connecting for me. I would watch the repeats of the Twilight Zone,
Mhm.
and then when I locked on to Kolchak, and then Vincent Price movies, all that. But I'm thinking of the name Richard Matheson, of course,
Matheson,
who
yeah, he wrote
you know
those two movies of the week.
and then what was that moment for you where you started seeing, okay, the guy that is involved with this thing over here that I love is also the guy involved with this, and it just all the world starts connecting all the dots.
Well, I was a credits reader as a kid.
Yeah,
And so between Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, the I think Kolchak, and then the books, I Am Legend, um, that kind of stuff. You start to see the through line, because it wasn't just Richard Matheson. And for me, it was Rod Serling. It was, I think, Charles Beaumont. It was a bunch of those guys that you would see pop up all over the place. And I think even for Richard Matheson, The Pit and the Pendulum, those low budget
the
Edgar Allan
Corman,
Poe movies. Yeah, those movies. Even Rod Serling with Planet of the Apes. All of these things sort of had like there was like the Zotro crew with Coppola and Lucas and all of those guys. There was like this period where they sort of ruled science fiction and horror and they're little at a corner of that market. And I want to be one of those guys. I don't know when the bridge became um, loving it to wanting to be a part of it. But it was definitely there, planted a seed, for an only child. It gave me something to put my mind on.
yeah. You were also a Universal Monsters kid,
Mhm.
and was the Wolfman by far, in a way, your guy, your monster of choice?
Um, Lon Chaney's and Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman certainly grabbed my attention, but I was as much of a vampire. There were more vampires. There was more of the Hammer films because these movies were made before I was born, so I was able to sort of consume the Hammer films at the same time that I was able to kind of take in all of that stuff. So whether it was Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing or Bela Lugosi, there was so much vampire stuff there that I would say Dracula grabbed me as much as the Wolfman did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Dracula was certainly my entry point in the Universal monsters. I think probably like a lot of people, and later unofficially kind of dubbed the king of the Universal monsters. But then I
Yes.
then I was more of a Wolfman and then creature guy. So the when we talk about Batman Full Moon, this is definitely a book that obviously we have the Batman element of it, but it's a monster book, and it is very much, it feels like it could be a continuation of a Universal Monsters story down to our werewolf character's name.
Yes, for sure. I mean, it was certainly influenced. When I was talking to DC, I'm going to move to a quieter part of the.
Quite all right. I live in New York City. I'm in Brooklyn right now, so
Yeah,
you never
I'm
know when you're going to have New York saying hi in the form of sirens or guys fighting
yeah,
outside.
moving to quieter quarters. Ask me the question one more time, please.
Oh, just I mean the you said when you were
Oh,
talking
the
to
Christian
DC about
Talbot.
this, yeah.
Yeah, there was when I was talking to DC about it. One of the things that jumped out was that the Universal Monsters, what we're talking about right now, and how could we do a Batman book that felt like a Universal Monsters movie, a Black Label book, and how could we do a book where it was all of the stuff you couldn't see in a Universal Monsters movie because it was, you were limited by the time and the scope. You couldn't pull off arms and do all of that stuff. And you would hear Lon Chaney would growl and then jump on someone, and you would hear the "Arr!" but you wouldn't really see limbs and blood and things jump around. So adding that part to the idea of just a tortured soul, and that idea that a werewolf is a tortured soul as much as he is a monster.
But Batman has faced werewolves before. I think
Yeah. Neil Adams,
Neil
I think
Adams,
it
yeah.
might be 251. Yeah, that one where he's chained to a sewer drain and a werewolf is like leaping at him.
So what was the approach for this that you knew you wanted to make different? Obviously, we're going full on horror in this, and there is,
Mhm.
limbs being ripped off. But yeah, what else did you want to do to differentiate yourself from previous Batman v Monster stories?
That there was a sentimental vibe I was going for, a sense of dread. Still trying to have a thin line of hope run through, because this book is going to end. We know Batman's not going to die, spoiler alert. But we want him to be able to relate to the suffering somewhat and relate his own pain and anger to what our beast is going through. Um, I wanted to add a couple of layers, beyond just fighting a werewolf. What does this all mean, and how does it affect the people that are nearest and dearest to Bruce Wayne slash Batman?
Yeah, and who did you think of as this Batman slash Bruce Wayne? Because he's established in his Batman career, but he is also very cynical and uh, disbelieving of magic and mysticism, and I would say he's not always the most likable version
No.
of Bruce.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that in order for him to do the thing that he does, there's an element of asshole that's there. You see, it's almost like a homicide detective. You see the worst of what people do to each other. And if you're Batman and you're fighting crime in the alleyways and shadows of Gotham City, you're seeing some really gnarly stuff. And what does that do to you? That makes you a cynic. And I think within that asshole is more cynicism than it is purposefully trying to not care. Because the thing that he does, the verb of what he does as a crime fighter is I care about human beings and I want to keep the world safe. I want to keep Gotham City safe. But the work itself, is it met with joy? If you're that guy, it's not like Superman where you're flying above the city. You're sort of in the city. You know, you're in it. You're fighting like you're trying to rip this cancer away from a place that you love. And to me, a sense of dark humor, a sense of cynicism, all of those other words apply because until you've won, you're in the war.
Yeah, this cancer, which is crime on the city of Gotham, and just he tries to rip it away every night. Doesn't it's debatable
Right.
how successful he is, and then we have the curse of the werewolf is a different kind of cancer.
Yes,
It's always aggressive. It's always attacking, and really the only end is the only respite is death.
exactly. Exactly. So coming to that conclusion, that's also a journey as well.
How does that reflect your own philosophy? Because you've even said like on let's say the Runful podcast, which we'll get to, and I realize it's a scripted podcast, but you're like I'm not really someone that, but I don't buy into the idea of faith or whatever. And this Bruce Wayne is not faith driven, not belief driven. So all right, would you define yourself as a cynical person? Where do you fit in this?
There's certainly, if anybody's listening to this that knows me, there is a duality of, in order to work in the industry that I work in, there has to be a degree of faith that the phone's going to ring, that somebody's going to say yes. There has to be a degree of faith in your own ability because you hear no a lot, you get rejected a lot. You have to be able to deal with those rejections, and you have to have faith in yourself that it's worth getting up tomorrow and trying again. So there's that. That said, much like, when we were talking about Bruce a moment ago, you still deal in an industry where you deal in a realm of uncertainty. There's constant uncertainty. And within that, you have to have kind of a steely, resilient resolve. And you have to be able to deal with that. And so some people meet that with, glee and joy and optimism. I tend to brace myself for the punch, whether it comes or not. I'm always prepared for no. I'm always prepared to endure disappointment. So I'm sure that that doesn't necessarily present itself to sunny disposition at all times.
But I respect that. I almost think that you have to be in touch with your own inner cynic and your own disappointments and whatnot in order to. It's almost like an earned optimism instead of a something that just comes naturally and too easily. Which I kind of this is me sharing a lot about me, but I kind of respect that because it's like if I know sort of the darkness inside me, that cynicism inside me, then when I'm working towards the optimism and the faith and whatnot, it does make it feel a little bit more earned. Does that make sense? Is
Yeah,
that yeah?
yeah, it does. And it's still in a weird way, it kind of makes the journey, it brings some sense of when you do finally get the word yes, when you finally get that yes after all of that time, it sort of validates the disposition in a weird way, even the darkness within it. I don't know if that makes sense,
No, it
but
does.
there's something in it to where I'm going to go on this journey. It feels like if someone's going to climb a mountain or try to do anything that is difficult, and certainly things that people don't often do, climb Mount Everest or whatever. They say so many people die every year trying to climb Mount Everest. Um, but when you do and you make it, and so many other times having failed, there's something to it that like restores your faith, you
Mm.
know, but it doesn't make those times that it doesn't work out any easier,
Yeah.
So a career in Hollywood is sort of juxtaposing failure and the occasional success for me.
Yeah. I mean, you've certainly had quite a bit of success, and I'm sure, quite a bit of failures that nobody ever even finds out about.
We- We're
And
here for the 35 times they've said yes, not for the 10,035 times they've said no.
yeah. Um, And that's, I feel like that's, I don't want to go off track too much, but something that I appreciate about you and appreciate about your social media presence is that it's likable, it's informative, but there's also this wisdom that is present. And I was kind of curious about when you felt like, okay, I have like a little bit of wisdom to impart at this point about this business that I operate in and about the genres that the sandboxes I've played in, enough to like impart it on other people because you do that too soon, then you're the professor, the academic in the room that has earned the PhD, but doesn't really have the boots on the ground experience, right?
Right.
But you have enough battle scars where it's like, okay, I feel like I can say something. When did you feel like you hit that point where you're like, I feel like I have something to impart?
I don't actually know if I have, but people keep asking me, so I say, I answer the question. It's not like I wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to help someone do a thing because I'm still in the war just like everybody else. Like I still have to get up and I need another show. I need to do a thing. I still fight procrastination. I still am trying to pull the best out of myself. So I'm in the battle just like everybody else. That said, I've managed to have, if this were, since I'm older, Vietnam, I've done a bunch of tours and I've been able to live. So at some point, you put together, you correlate the things that you've done to help you survive. I look at it more like that than anything else. There is no one way to be successful at anything, certainly in this endeavor. But I do think that there are principles underneath it that apply to everything. And I, the great Stephen Pressfield, who wrote a book called The War of Art that I love, I went to one of his talks the other night. And I still try to approach this like it's new, like I'm new, like with the same degree of idealism that I went into the other day. I'm still trying to get the best out of myself. And so I tend to attract people who have a similar state of mind. They're trying to get the best out of themselves. So it's like we sort of vibe in a way that you're sharing information. I don't think I'm teaching anybody anything. I don't think I'm speaking from on high. It's just like a lot of times it's even warnings. If I've gone down a street before someone else has and I hit a pothole, it's telling somebody a pothole is up ahead, watch out. It's more that than it is do this, do that. Because everybody has their own voice, everybody has their own process, everybody has their own way of being a writer, being in this business, dealing with things. I just speak to the things that have worked for me. And sometimes the thing that worked for me yesterday may not work tomorrow, and I might have to switch up. I may hear or get some more information from someone that I look to for support, and, you know, if I can share that, somehow it gives me a feeling of community, sense of community.
It seems like the sharing of that knowledge, it's more the democratization of sort of the knowledge or the a little bit of the insider tips. I think
Yeah. Yes.
it's it's a beautiful thing, especially since it was such a closed circle for so long, where there was a lot happening in the industry that people didn't want that information out there. And now through social media and everything, you can kind of talk directly to people out there and say, like, look, these are some things that people may not tell you about this world, but now I'm going to give this to you for free, so you can avoid some of the pain that I've experienced, or a little bit of a tip like that.
For sure. I mean, I think I would be, I can't count the amount of people who gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it. And whether it was advice or, some kind of tip, something, pointed a book, anything that just helped along the way. Sometimes just sort of, again, going back to your faith question, just to say, keep hanging in there. There have been so many times where I wanted to stop. And when things got really, really hard, because I didn't grow up in a world where you had to find you had to find the work. You had to figure out the system. I came from a world, a blue collar world where you go into a factory, you go into a business, you fill out an application, you do an interview, you get the job or you don't. A resume, you send in your resume, they call you if they need you or whatever. And in Hollywood, there's no one way to become this. You have to write something, the right person has to read it. Um, then you get something, then maybe you get an agent, then you got to get the right agent. Then you have to continuously ring this bell and get another gig and another gig and another gig. Or some people are able to leapfrog the process and get a huge thing coming out of the box and they could work forever. Um, that hasn't been my experience. I've had a lot of things that have been moderately successful and over time. Um, you know, um, just to be able to continue is different, because I remember my grandmother getting on me when I first started. It's like, wait a minute, you might not have a job next year. And I'm like, I may not have a job next month. We could get canceled, and that didn't register. Like, where's the security in that? Where's the health insurance? Where's the pension in that? And it
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a lot of longevity. So,
Uh, Let me go back to werewolves. I most certainly could talk
yes.
industry stuff all day. I'm so fascinated by your take on it. But as far as the Batman book, we also have these supporting characters in Batman Full Moon of Constantine and Zatanna, and then Man-Bat, Kirk Langstrom. These make sense for this kind of story to include these characters, but it's also I suspect it could be a potential distraction as a creator to then make it too much about like overloading it with these supporting characters. So, what was sort of the balance for you going into this about keeping this as a Batman book, but having these other characters in there, and at different stages of them knowing, Batman, Bruce Wayne, yeah. So, yeah, introducing these guys into this book. What was your balance?
Got to give them each a sense of purpose. Why are they in the story? Other than to put them in the ad to say, "Ooh, we've got all these other people coming." What's the nature of their relationship to Bruce Wayne slash Batman? And what are their stakes in the story?
Yeah,
With Zatanna, she has some history with, Eastern Europe, and with, of course, Alfred is Alfred. And Constantine shows up when there are paranormal problems that persist. Man-Bat is working at Wayne Pharmaceuticals, so he's already engrossed, and he has his own personal connection to, the whole monster plague of self thing. So each of them sort of has an entry point where they could really take on this story themselves, and they have a relationship to Batman. So continuously threading that needle, Zatanna with the interpersonal relationship, but making her more than just, the love interest. She has to have an active role in it and has an active role in it. Um, you got to check all of the boxes as you're continuously moving forward and moving through issues. I wanted to say episodes, issues.
yeah. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that we do have full on werewolf Batman wolf.
Oh yeah, a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Bunch of them. Yeah,
The again, I love this because we have a full on horror comic, but I also was brought back to Mark Grunwald's Capwolf a little bit from the early
yeah.
1992. I'm sure you're familiar with that
I
storyline.
am. I
The
am.
what was what is the pitch to DC, but also your own like creative process about like that was a great story. It stood on its own. It's bizarre. It's fun, but this is not what that's going to be.
Right. Um, you mean as it related to Man-Bat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess yeah, just just generally the how to avoid comparisons with Capwolf, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think Batman has his own established world and tone
Yeah.
as to how he does what he does. I think it's more an execution. And I had to do so much outlining and, plot stuff before DC would sign off that they know what it is before they say go.
Yeah. And the art from Steven Subic, is that how you pronounce
Yes,
it?
that's how I say it.
Gorgeous art. Um,
Mhm.
and that process with him, what were some of the moments where you're seeing this art unfold and it positively impacted your story, or you're like, okay, I'm liking what he's doing and it's breathing this new life into it that I didn't even expect. Any reveals like that during that process?
Yeah, when he designed, when we were talking what the werewolf would look like, when we started talking about that process, because you've got the Lon Chaney flat face, dog face, kind of furry faced, you know, old school universal werewolf, and then you've got the howling, or American Werewolf in London. Seems like it's one of those two that you're going to pick, where there's a snout, there's a thing, and he's huge. And that's what we went for. And then when he brought it back, because I was like, I wanted something that Batman could not physically defeat. I wanted like that Bane type of idea where he's just not going to, even though he's defeated Bane hand to hand, but, Bane broke his back. And so I wanted that kind of savagery where, okay, it's going to take something more than just karate and some gadgets to be able to win.
Hmm. Yeah, and I won't spoil the ending there, but
Yeah.
questionable whether or not he does win.
This is true. This is true.
You have the new Ahsoka season one comic that's
Mhm.
the volume is out now, right?
Mhm.
Shifting into this world a little bit, what's sort of the appeal for you in the Ahsoka world?
It's the Star Wars world. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that they keep asking me to come back and do
Yeah.
Star Wars work. And love Star Wars as a kid. It moves at a lot faster pace than it did when I was a kid. If you watch the A New Hope versus the stuff they do today, it's like two different ideas. But Um, anytime I get to do the adaptations, it's fun first, and it gives me a reason to sit and watch the show beyond wanting to watch the show. And it's more about me just not having time to sit down and watch and do much of anything, but I can say I'm working now. And to really just go through a need, and big shout out to my assistants who helped me transcribe all of this stuff because it's not really writing those books in the same way. It's more or less taking a thing that's an hour and crunching it down into 20 or 30 pages and still making it feel like the thing that felt like an hour.
Hmm.
It's more plotting, it's more pacing, it's more interpretation than it is writing from zero to one. My original Star Wars stuff, Lando Double or Nothing, my IG-88 one shot, Inquisitors, and I've got a couple more that I'm doing. That's a different process. Yeah, it's a different process than I think Ahsoka and what else? The other adapted Mandalorian,
Hmm.
season one and two. There are a couple of others in there, and a couple more to come, and a couple originals to come. But yeah, I just love playing in that world, in the
Yeah.
Star Wars world. Never would have thought in a million years that we'd be talking Rodney Barnes and Star Wars and Batman in the same paragraph.
Yeah, and also
Mhm.
executive producing shows like Everybody Hates Chris, and then
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Winning Time Lakers Dynasty
yep.
show. I just those are it's not that I would ever want to put someone in a box, but man, like you cover a lot of ground. I don't know exactly how you manage the time of this is Rodney working on comedy, documentary series, and now Star Wars Sandbox, and then the horror Sandbox. How
Yep.
many versions of you are there out there, and how do you guys all get along?
There's only one. I mean, it's all story to me. Whether it's a story in you know, a in the far reaches of the galaxy, or one that's happening in Lansing, Michigan, or one that's happening um, in Woodcrest with the Boondocks. It's
Yeah.
all sort of still story at the end of the day. So I approach it. I started in sitcoms. So when you're doing a sitcom, you're sort of you got to make a show a week, whether it's good, bad. someplace in between, you're going to put on a show. And that sort of galvanized the idea that, oh, this is Star Wars. Oh, this is Batman. Oh, this is, Winning Time or whatever else it is that's in front of me. I've got to sit down and just write this story. So I don't really compartmentalize. I think it's that's sort of a luxury I've never really had, where I can sit down and just think of one thing. I remember when I first got into business, and that thing my grandmother would ask, okay, so what happens when this show goes away? Oh, you get another one. When does that happen? Well, when they hire you or you create one or you whatever. And there was so many unknowns within that idea. My anxiety doesn't deal well with that. So typically I have 11 things going at one time, and maybe if the universe is kind, one or two will ever become a thing.
Well, and you also have the Run Full podcast, which
Mhm.
I'm ashamed to say, like it's still fairly new on my radar. So I've been listening to these episodes, and man, I love it.
Thank you.
It's really it scratches my itch as a good horror and monster podcast. I know it's kind of under the true crime category, but I
Which
don't
is,
really.
I've never understood why that was, but I'll
Yeah.
take it. We're number 37 in the world, so I'll take it.
And you're covering stories like the Kushtaka out of Alaska, which I've always loved that lore. What is, you're writing the episodes and you're narrating them, and there's a nice production design and everything on this. But how does this scratch your itch? Like, why is this a thing that you need to add on top of everything else that you're doing?
Um, Great question. One, it's a bunch of writers. It's three writers primarily. We all get together on Mondays with our producer, and we talk story, and everybody pitches stories, and we kind of work it like a makeshift writer's room. And, they do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to refining and putting them together and all of that stuff. My primary job is to say yes, no, guide, and eventually perform, and use my voice. What it does for me was, when I first came to Hollywood, I wasn't going to be writing sitcoms. I wanted to write horror stories. I wanted to do like my own Sinners or whatever, the stuff Jordan Peele does and Ryan Coogler and folks like that. And that door, I could not get that door to open. So whatever door opened, I walked in, but I didn't give up that other idea of what I wanted to do. So a lot of times ideas that I couldn't get across the goal line in movies and TV shows, I made as comic books or Killadelphia, for example. Um, and I just kept doing it. And then when another door or avenue would open, the podcast world opened up because I did the after show podcast for Winning Time. I
Right.
hosted that and we won a Signal Award. So people started saying, hey, you ever consider doing podcasts? And so I was fortunate enough that at Will Media and Campside Media, we had a meeting about another project, and we enjoyed talking to each other. And they were like, "Hey, your voice, you ever consider doing that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I have. I just don't know. Each one of these worlds has its own culture. Comics, TV, film. They all have the way that they work." And so they were like, "Well, if you ever come up with an idea," and I was like, "Hey, I got an idea." And I pitched it to him, and a couple of months later, I was in a booth telling a story. So, we've done 76 so far, and we'll see what the future holds. But I love doing it. I love being able to integrate, the foundation of it is my grandmother used to tell me scary stories. And being able to sort of semi autobiographically go about talking about my life and scary stories at the same time. It's cathartic in a way. My mother just passed, and we just did a story that came out today about my mom's passing. And being able to integrate fantasy into my life sort of helps mitigate grief. It's sort of, and hopefully, we've done probably about 6 or 7 episodes I'm incredibly proud of, where we talk about grief, we talk about loss, we talk about hope and redemption and those types of things. And it is really cathartic. And it is, in my opinion, the best of what the genre can be used for. The ability to sort of speak to folks without it feeling like medicine and allowing the fantasy to be gentle, and not necessarily abrasive, and creating a connective sense of community. That's what we've always wanted Run for. That's what that my intentions were that. And so, tough in a world that's as polarized as the world that we're in right now to do that, because typically people are looking to, okay, am I going to like this? Am I not? Do the values of this line up to what I believe in? But whether it's on my Instagram page, whether it's Run Fool, or even the books that I do, I try not to really infuse me in it. No one knows what I believe or what I think, who I voted for or what cause I'm, contributing to. It's really more about that central feeling, that core feeling that I had as a kid when I just loved this stuff. And I've come to find that there are a lot of people, in that 30-ish to 60-ish period of time that is sentimental about the same stuff that I'm sentimental about and wants to connect to that stuff. So if I can make things that feed into that idea, not only from a place of creativity or business, but also as a place to put my mind again, like when I was a kid, a place where you're creating friends and people you may never meet, but you're still getting that conversation going that you had at the lunch table at school, or when your friends in the neighborhood, when we would collect comics together and, fight over who was stronger, Thor or Hulk, or, those types of things. There's a goodness, there's a purity there that I think brings a sense of purity to life that can be lost sometimes in the grind.
The your comment about your grandmother telling you stories, I'm thinking of Bram Stoker, his mother
Hmm.
could tell stories of Irish folklore, dark Irish folklore, as
Yes.
well as her growing up in this time of cholera and the horrors that she experienced as a little kid. Um, and I love that I mean, I don't love that she had to go through that, but I love that storytelling tradition is passed down. So if you can, tell me a little bit about your grandmother and what is a story that sticks with you that she told that freaked you out or stoked the notion of the boogeyman or, monsters in the woods or whatever it might be.
It was funny. I was talking about this morning. My grandmother, when my mother was in graduate school, which was unusual for its time, just that in the 70s that she was going to graduate school. My grandmother would watch me a lot, and she had a way of getting my attention without force. Like she had a way of loving me, but also being able to capture. She was paying attention to me. She knew what I liked. She knew what I didn't like. And there would be these moments where in the summertime, the old people would sit outside on the porch and talk. It was a true sense of community. Like I never lived through a period as a kid where you can't go outside and you're worried about, like, kids today want to be inside on their phones. You couldn't stop us from wanting to be outside. Like outside was like freedom. And we were always outside. So I would sit outside with my grandmother, and then we're talking 5, 6, 7 years old. And she would sit there and she would be knitting something or making something, and it would just be a peaceful vibe. And every once in a while, when the planets would align, she would start to tell me a story. And we had a big willow tree in our front yard, and one in the backyard too. And I remember that tree. I remember like summer nights when the moon would shine through and we would be sitting there. She would just be talking to me. And she told me a story one time about when she got lost in the woods and how the trees would light up and guided her home. I don't remember the whole story. I just remember the headlines. I remember the part you remember when you see a scary story, when you would hear a thing. And the way she told the way she told the story with a calm and an ease. It wasn't told like, and then this happened. It was really like matter of factly. And it was within the matter of factly that almost made it feel true and real. And she was laying a foundation. She was laying a foundation not only of getting my attention, but how you go about telling a story. And there'll be a lot of times when I'm in meetings um, where I will tell a story in a similar way. I know something's coming, the jump scare is coming. I know that there's this moment that's coming in the story, but I tell it just like I'm talking to you right now. And then that thing happens. You see people react. That came from my grandmother. That came from the way that she would tell a story and that calm and that sense of ease that she would tell it. So again, a lot of these principles go into the Run Fool podcast and the stories that we tell. And that's my honoring and tribute to her. Because just like comic books, you don't go into these things to make money. There's not like, unless you're like the Joe Rogan types and you're in the top 10, most of these things that people do, they do because they love it, and it's a way of expressing. I think there's so much, going back to that word cynicism, of the business of the entertainment business that can make you lose the romance and the idealism. It's nice to have tendrils into things that just feel romantic and idealistic.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing that. That's I love that. And I can, now that you've said this about how she just unfolds the story, I can
Hmm.
see a lot of that or hear a lot of that in the Run Full podcast, the presentation of it.
Hmm.
So that makes a lot of sense. You grew up in Annapolis?
Annapolis, Maryland.
Yeah. Did you have a urban legend, creepy old house at the end of the block,
Oh
hook
yeah,
for a hand kind of killer? Any stories like that from your
we
upbringing?
had we had a couple of houses that were condemned. The woods was always a good one. There was always something we would either make up or something that was lore. We had Goat Man. We had Goat Man and we had the Bunny Man in that area that was killing people and doing all types of things. And there were so many different versions of those guys that you didn't know which one was in quotes true. So you feel free to insert your own version of what that is. Um, it was, I always describe that period of time when you're riding your bike in front of the house that, supposedly the bad thing happened in, or you're going into the woods, of just a period of time where it was fun danger. It wasn't danger, danger. It wasn't like danger in the sense of I may really die or the ghost is going to get me or whatever. It was the kind of danger that's fun. Again, when you go back to the Universal Monster movies and you go back to that thing where there's no Frankenstein, there's no, like, with the pitchforks and the torches and they're going to go up the hill. This isn't something that you're relating to in that way. And I think the thing that changed, you think of the 70s when Last House on the Left, the Wes Craven movies and the Cronenberg movies and George Romero and all of that, and Stephen King and some of the later work with Richard Matheson started to turn a corner of it became real. And I was right on that line between it's fantasy and fun because I've never been, 7, 8, 9 years old. I hadn't been to London. So when you're in the Hammer films and you're in a carriage going through the woods with wolves running next to the carriage, like I'm watching this. I'm not really feeling this and identifying with it as something from my experience. But once you get into the Stephen King stuff and the kid I went to school with gets killed, or the family is coming apart, and these stories now are becoming closer and closer to home. That's speaking to the world changing. That's also speaking to a lot of the things that I thought that were idealistic in my neighborhood. Probably things were happening behind closed doors, and people just weren't talking about them. You're starting to see life from a more grounded place than the fantasy that horror sometimes allows you to sort of, or genre allows you to sort of lose yourself in. And riding that wave, the world just changed. And so now, me with my work, trying to find the middle ground. What's the middle ground between the house with the ghost in it and the trauma that person that became a ghost felt? Like, what's the middle place that still can make it fun and have a degree of innocence where you can lose yourself and still not acknowledge and still acknowledge that we live in a dangerous world?
Yeah. Before I let you go, I am curious if there's interest in returning to the Batman Full Moon kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
world.
Yeah, that's all on DC Comics. I mean, I pitched a couple of things to him, and it's a weird thing in the comic book world. Unless you're like the legendary vet guys, I don't know how it works for them, but I wait until I get an email.
Yeah.
I get an email one morning, I wake up and there's an email from an editor saying, "Hey, would you like to do this?" Um, it's been that way since day one. And maybe, it's on me too, but it's not like I don't have other things to do where I can just sit around and think of pitches. Um, I typically wait for that, but whether it's Star Wars or whatever, 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, someone's coming to me asking me to do something. I still have a Kolchak book that I'm behind on. Sorry, James Aquilone, I will get it to you, I promise. I'm doing 30 Days of Night now. My friend Steve Niles, his great world that he built and created. Um, it's just really, it's an honor to be in this space. And as it comes, it comes. But I'm always excited that, whether it's, racing at me or whether it's coming in slowly, it keeps coming. So I'm very grateful and thankful for that.
That's Rodney Barnes, award-winning writer, producer, comic book creator of Killadelphia, of the adaptation Blacula, Return of the King, of the Ahsoka season 1 comic, as well as Mandalorian season 1 and 2 comics, and Batman Full Moon, the book that is now out in hardcover by DC Comics, Batman and Werewolves. Rodney is someone I really respect, someone that's really just established in this genre and is a busy guy and just is always doing incredible things. I don't know how he has time for all of it. Also, you need to check out his social media and keep up with that because it talks a lot about horror in a fun, funny way and really informed. I mean, he's just a fun guy to watch. So check that out. And that's at the Rodney Barnes on Instagram. That's it for me for this installment of Talking Strange. Till next time, be kind, stay spooky, keep it weird.